The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the nervous energy of 1,000 different species, each representative seated according to their world's political standing. Crystalline beings from Xerion Prime hummed in harmonic frequencies, while the massive Carathians shifted their armored bulk in specially reinforced seats. The air recyclers worked overtime to accommodate the various atmospheric preferences, creating small pockets of breathable space for everyone present. Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat in the human delegation's modest section, her dark eyes scanning the imposing assembly. Humans had only been part of the Galactic Council for 3 standard years, and their presence was still met with mixed reactions. Some species viewed them with curiosity, others with barely concealed disdain. Today felt different, though. Today, tension crackled through the chamber like electricity before storm. The session had been called to address the ongoing crisis in the Andorian sector, where slavers from the hegemony had been systematically capturing entire colonies. 17 worlds had fallen silent in the past 6 months, their populations presumably taken for the illegal labor markets that thrived in the galaxy's darker corners. The Council had been debating response protocols for weeks, but no consensus had emerged. The humans speak of military intervention, rumbled Vextar, the Carathian war chief whose species had dominated galactic politics for over 2 centuries. His 4 arms gestured dismissively, each movement creating small tremors in his section of the chamber. Yet what do they truly know of warfare beyond their small world? They have fought among themselves like primitive beasts, yes, but real war? War against the void itself. Elena felt her jaw tighten, but she remained silent. The Carathians had indeed fought longer wars across greater distances, their empire spanning dozens of systems. They had every right to question human military experience on a galactic scale. The hegemony commands fleets that have conquered star systems while your species was still discovering fire, continued Vextar, his reptilian features twisting into what might have been a sneer. Their battle stations can crack planets. Their soldiers are bred from birth for warfare, enhanced with technology your people cannot even comprehend. And you suggest sending your fragile vessels against such might. The chamber filled with various sounds of agreement. Clicking from the insectoid klaxons, harmonic resonance from the crystal beings, and deep rumbles from other massive species. Elena noticed that not all species were joining this chorus, but enough for to make the human position seem foolish. Representative Quintal from the Ethereal Collective spoke next, her translucent form shimmering as she addressed the assembly. The Carathian speaks truth. Humans, while admirable in their tenacity, lack the fundamental understanding of true galactic warfare. Their courage, while present in small doses, has never been tested against the horrors that exist between the stars. Elena's colleague, Admiral Harrison, leaned forward slightly. His weathered face showed decades of Earth's naval conflicts, but she knew he was calculating the political cost of speaking out. The human delegation had been walking a diplomatic tightrope since joining the Council, trying to prove their worth without appearing aggressive or presumptuous. Furthermore, Vextar's voice boomed across the chamber. Courage itself is a luxury of species who have not faced true extinction. When hegemony's soul breakers turn their attention to a world, courage becomes meaningless. Only raw power and experience matter. The humans possess neither in sufficient quantity. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had read the classified reports about the hegemony's methods. The Soulbreakers weren't just weapons. They were psychological warfare devices that could drive entire populations into catatonic despair before the first landing craft touched ground. Earth's military had nothing comparable, no defense against such technology. I propose, Vextar continued, that we pursue diplomatic channels with the hegemony. Perhaps arrangement can be reached. The affected sectors are, after all, on the periphery of civilized space. The loss, while regrettable, may be necessary to prevent a larger conflict that would devastate core worlds. The chamber erupted in discussion. Elena watched in growing horror as she realized what was happening. The Council was seriously considering abandoning 17 worlds and their billions of inhabitants to slavery rather than risk a confrontation with the hegemony. The mathematics were coldly logical from a galactic perspective, but the human cost was staggering. She stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the chamber settling on her small figure. At just over 5.5 feet tall, Elena cut an unremarkable figure among the giants and exotic beings surrounding her. Her simple diplomatic uniform seemed almost quaint compared to the elaborate ceremonial armor and biomechanical augmentations displayed by other representatives. Ambassador Vasquez requests recognition, announced the chamber's AI in a dozen different languages and communication methods simultaneously. The human may speak, Vextar acknowledged with obvious reluctance. Elena took a deep breath, calling up every lesson from her diplomatic training. Honor representatives, I understand the Council's concerns about engaging the hegemony directly. Their military capabilities are indeed formidable, and the risk of escalation is real. However, I must respectfully challenge the assertion that humans lack courage when facing impossible odds. A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through parts of the assembly. Elena pressed on, her voice growing stronger. 3 years ago, when the Council first encountered humanity, our species was indeed provincial by galactic standards. We had never traveled beyond our own solar system, never faced alien technology, never even conceived of some of the horrors that exist in deep space. But in those 3 years, we have learned much. She activated her personal display, showing a holographic representation of the affected sector. The 17 worlds under hegemony control represent over 4 billion sentient beings. 4 billion individuals with families, dreams, hopes, and the same basic desire for freedom that drives every species in this chamber. The mathematics of galactic politics may make their sacrifice seem reasonable, but mathematics cannot account for what we lose when we abandon our principles for convenience. Vextar's laugh was like boulders grinding together. Principles. The human speaks of principles while facing an enemy that has subjugated entire galactic arms. Tell me, Ambassador, what principles will protect your world when the hegemony turns its attention to Earth? What principles will save your people when the soul breakers reduce your population to mindless slaves? Elena felt her heart racing, but her voice remained steady. The same principles that have driven humans to fight impossible battles throughout our history. The same principles that led individual humans to stand against overwhelming odds when retreat would have been logical. We call it courage, War Chief Vextar, and it is not a luxury we indulge in during peaceful times. It is the foundation of who we are. Empty words Vextar dismissed. Courage without power is meaningless. The hegemony will not be impressed by your species' romantic notions of heroism. The chamber had grown quiet, the various species listening intently to this exchange. Elena realized she was at a crossroads. Everything she said now would either establish humanity as a voice worth hearing in galactic affairs, or confirm their status as naive newcomers playing at politics beyond their understanding. You're right about one thing, War Chief, she said quietly. Courage without action is indeed meaningless. Words spoken in comfortable chambers while others suffer carry no weight. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembly. Perhaps it's time for someone to demonstrate what human courage actually looks like when facing impossible odds. The implications of her words sent a chill through the chamber. Several representatives began speaking at once, but Elena continued. The hegemony has issued challenges before, haven't they? Single combat to determine the fate of disputed territories? Ancient protocols that even their twisted leadership still honors. Vextar's 4 arms went completely still. Human, surely you do not suggest. I suggest exactly what you would expect from a species you claim lacks courage, Elena replied, her voice now carrying clearly through the sudden silence. If the hegemony wants these 17 worlds, let them face a representative of the species willing to fight for them. Single combat, according to their own protocols, with the fate of those 4 billion souls as the stakes. The chamber exploded into chaos. Representatives shouted, clicked, hummed, and roared in a dozen different forms of communication. Elena remained standing, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "This is madness." Vextar's voice cut through the noise. "The Hegemony's champions are genetically enhanced warriors trained from birth in the art of killing. They stand 9 feet tall, possess reflexes faster than most species can even perceive, and have never lost a single combat. You will be sending yourself to certain death for empty symbolism." Elena looked directly into his reptilian eyes. "Perhaps, but at least 4 billion people will know that someone was willing to try, that someone believed their freedom was worth the risk, that someone chose to act instead of simply calculating acceptable losses." The silence that followed was absolute. Elena could feel the weight of galactic politics shifting around her words, could sense the calculations happening in minds far more advanced than her own. She had just committed humanity to a course of action that would either prove their worth or demonstrate their foolishness on the largest possible stage. "The human's proposal has merit," came a surprising voice from the ethereal collective section. Representative Quintal's translucent form pulsed with soft light. "The Hegemony respects strength above all else. They might indeed honor such a challenge, if properly presented." Other voices began to join the discussion, some supportive, others dismissive. Elena remained standing, knowing that her next words would determine not just her own fate, but humanity's role in the galaxy for generations to come. "I formally request that this council authorize a challenge to the Hegemony under the ancient protocols of single combat," she said, her voice cutting through the debate. "Let their champion face a representative of the species they claim lacks courage. Let the fate of 17 worlds be decided not by the mathematics of power, but by the willingness to risk everything for what is right." Vextar stared at her for a long moment, his reptilian features unreadable. "And who, Ambassador Vasquez, would serve as humanity's champion in this impossible challenge?" Elena felt the chamber's attention focus on her like a physical weight. Every diplomatic instinct she possessed screamed warnings about what she was about to say. Every logical thought in her mind pointed out the numerous ways this could end in disaster. But beneath all of that, something deeper and more fundamental drove her forward. "I will," she said simply. The private quarters aboard the council station had never felt smaller. Elena sat on the edge of her narrow bed, staring at the communication device in her hands while her stomach churned with a mixture of adrenaline and terror. 3 hours had passed since her declaration in the council chamber, and the reality of what she had committed to was beginning to sink in with crushing clarity. Admiral Harrison paced the small space like a caged animal, his weathered face creased with worry and barely contained anger. "Elena, what the hell were you thinking? This isn't some diplomatic negotiation where you can talk your way out of trouble. You just volunteered to fight a creature designed specifically to kill." "I was thinking about 4 billion people who are going to disappear into slavery if we don't act," Elena replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I was thinking about what it means to be human when everyone else in the galaxy sees us as weak and naive." "Being human doesn't mean being stupid," Harrison snapped, then immediately looked apologetic. "I'm sorry. That was out of line. But, Elena, you're a diplomat. You've never held a weapon in your life, except for basic training qualification. The Hegemony's champions are living weapons." Elena stood and moved to the small viewport, looking out at the stars that seemed so peaceful from this distance. Somewhere out there, 17 worlds were experiencing horrors she could barely imagine. Maybe that's exactly why it has to be me. Not a soldier, not a warrior bred for battle, just someone willing to stand up when everyone else sits down. "Nobility won't deflect a plasma blade," Harrison muttered, but his tone had softened. "Look, let me contact Earth Command. We can send for a volunteer from the Special Forces, someone with actual combat experience. And lose every ounce of impact this might have," Elena countered. The point isn't to send our best warrior. The point is to demonstrate that even our diplomats will fight when the cause is just. That courage isn't the exclusive domain of professional soldiers. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Elena activated the holographic display, and the stern face of Fleet Admiral Chun appeared in the small quarters. Ambassador Vasquez. Chen's voice carried across the light years with typical military precision. I've just received a rather disturbing report about events in the council chamber. Please tell me it's been exaggerated. I'm afraid not, Admiral, Elena replied. I've formally challenged the hegemony to single combat under their ancient protocols. Chen's expression didn't change, but Elena could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. I see. And you've appointed yourself as humanity's champion in this endeavor. Yes, sir. Against an enemy whose champions have never been defeated. Against a genetically enhanced warrior who will likely stand 3 feet taller than you and possess reflexes you can't even comprehend. Yes, sir. Chen was quiet for several seconds. Why? Elena had been expecting this question, had been preparing for it since the moment she stood up in the council chamber. Because sometimes, Admiral, doing the right thing matters more than doing the smart thing. Because 4 billion people deserve better than being written off as acceptable losses. And because every other species in this galaxy needs to understand that humans don't abandon people when the fight gets difficult. Even if it gets you killed? Even if it gets me killed. Chen's stern expression softened slightly. You know, Ambassador, 40 years ago, I might have called that the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. But 40 years of military service has taught me that sometimes the stupidest things are also the most necessary. He paused. What do you need? Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had expected lectures, demands to reconsider, possibly even orders to withdraw the challenge. Instead, she was getting support. Information, primarily. Everything we know about hegemony combat protocols, their champions, their technology. And she hesitated. Training. As much as we can manage in whatever time I have. Consider it done. I'm dispatching our best xenobiology experts to analyze whatever data the Council has on previous hegemony champions. As for training, Chen's expression became thoughtful. There's someone I want you to meet. The holographic display shifted, showing a second figure joining the conversation. Elena found herself looking at a woman who appeared to be in her early 30s, with short-cropped blonde hair and the kind of scars that spoke of extensive combat experience. Ambassador, meet Captain Sarah Mitchell. She's the commander of our new Xeno-3 response unit, and the closest thing we have to an expert on fighting unknown alien combatants. Captain Mitchell's smile was grim, but genuine. Ambassador, I'm going to be honest with you. What you're proposing is essentially suicide with extra steps. But if you're determined to go through with this, I'm going to make sure you're as prepared as possible. How much time do we have? Elena asked. The hegemony has agreed to honor the challenge. Admiral Harrison interjected, reading from his own communication device. The combat will take place in 72 hours on the neutral station at Kepler 442. That gives us 3 days to turn a diplomat into a warrior. Captain Mitchell's laugh was sharp. 3 days, right? Well, Ambassador, I hope you're a fast learner, because we're about to compress about 5 years of combat training into the next 72 hours. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of physical conditioning, weapons training, and strategic planning. Elena discovered muscles she hadn't known existed as Captain Mitchell put her through the most intensive crash course in personal combat ever devised. The station's gymnasium had been converted into a training facility, complete with holographic opponents and simulated combat scenarios. The key to fighting larger opponents is mobility, Mitchell explained as Elena struggled to master the basics of plasma blade combat. You'll never match their strength or reach, so you have to be smarter and faster. Use their size against them. Elena's arms ached from hours of weapons practice, and her legs felt like rubber from the constant movement drills. How much faster can a human possibly be compared to someone genetically enhanced for combat? That's the wrong question, Mitchell replied, deflecting Elena's clumsy attack with ease. You're not trying to be faster than them in absolute terms. You try to be more unpredictable, more creative. Enhanced warriors are often trained in specific patterns, specific responses. Chaos is your friend. Dr. Sarah Kim, the xenobiology expert who had arrived on a fast courier ship, looked up from her data tablets. I've been analyzing the footage of previous hegemony combat trials. Their champions follow remarkably consistent patterns. They're efficient, yes, but efficiency can become predictability with the right approach. Elena paused in her training, breathing heavily. What do you mean? Look at this. Dr. Kim activated a holographic display showing footage of a massive, armored figure fighting against what appeared to be a crystalline opponent. The hegemony champion always opens with the same sequence. Intimidating roar, dominant position establishment, then a standard power attack to test the opponent's defenses. They're following a script. Because it works, Mitchell observed. Most opponents are either dead or demoralized by the time they realize they're in a pattern. But patterns can be broken, Elena said slowly, beginning to understand. If I know what they're going to do, you can use it against them, Dr. Kim agreed. The question is whether you'll have the skill to capitalize on that knowledge. The answer to that question became clearer over the next 2 days. Elena threw herself into the training with desperate intensity, knowing that every minute could be the difference between life and death. She learned to move in ways that felt completely alien to her diplomatic background, to think in terms of angles and timing and opportunity. Captain Mitchell was relentless, but encouraging. You're not going to be a master warrior in 3 days, she said bluntly during one of their brief rest periods. But you're developing something that might be even more valuable. The mindset of someone with nothing to lose and everything to fight for. As the final day approached, Elena found herself changing in ways she hadn't expected. The careful diplomatic training that had defined her career was still there, but it was being overlaid with something harder and more primal. She was learning to think like a predator, to see combat not as chaos, but as a complex dance with lethal consequences. There's something else, Dr. Kim said during their final briefing session. The hegemony champions aren't just enhanced warriors. According to the data, they're also equipped with psychological warfare technology. Fear inducers, confidence dampeners, neural disruptors designed to break an opponent's will before the physical combat even begins. Elena felt her stomach drop. So, I'll be fighting not just their champion, but also their technology? That's where your diplomatic training might actually help, Captain Mitchell observed. You've spent years learning to maintain composure under pressure, to project confidence even when you're terrified. Those skills translate more than you might think. Admiral Harrison, who had been quietly observing the training sessions, stepped forward. Elena, there's still time to change your mind. We could send Mitchell or request additional time to prepare properly. No one would think less of you for reconsidering. Elena looked around at the faces surrounding her. These people had spent the last 3 days preparing her for what everyone acknowledged was likely a suicide mission. They had shared their expertise, their time, and their hope without question or hesitation. The weight of their confidence was both humbling and terrifying. Thank you, she said quietly. All of you. But this isn't just about combat anymore. Every species in the Council is watching to see what humanity will do when faced with impossible odds. If I back down now, we'll forever be seen as a species that talks big, but runs when things get difficult. And if you die? Harrison asked gently. Elena smiled, and for the first time in days, it felt genuine. Then, at least they'll know we're the species that dies standing up. The transport to Kepler 442 station departed 6 hours later. Elena sat in the passenger compartment, reviewing combat scenarios and trying to calm her racing mind. Across from her, Captain Mitchell made final adjustments to Elena's equipment while Dr. Kim ran through xenobiological data one last time. Remember, Mitchell said, checking the power cell on Elena's plasma blade, the first 30 seconds are crucial. If you can survive their initial assault and disrupt their pattern, you'll have a chance. The champions are used to quick victories. A prolonged fight might actually work in your favor. Elena nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it. 3 days of training, no matter how intensive, couldn't possibly prepare her for what was coming. But as she looked out the viewport at the growing shape of Kepler 442 station, she felt something unexpected settling in her chest. Not confidence exactly, but a calm acceptance of what she had chosen to do. In less than 12 hours, she would step into an arena with a creature designed to kill her. The odds were astronomical against her survival. The logical choice would be to surrender, to accept the loss of 17 worlds as the price of avoiding a larger conflict. But Elena Vasquez had not become humanity's representative by making logical choices. She had gotten here by believing that sometimes the impossible was worth attempting, that sometimes standing up mattered more than staying safe. Tomorrow, she would discover whether the universe agreed with that philosophy. As the station grew larger in the viewport, Elena closed her eyes and thought about 4 billion people she had never met, scattered across 17 worlds she had never seen. They were counting on her, whether they knew it or not. They deserved someone willing to fight for them, even if that someone was just a diplomat who had learned to hold a weapon 3 days ago. The arena aboard Kepler 442 station had been constructed for exactly this type of event, though it rarely saw use. Ancient galactic protocols demanded that territorial disputes could be settled through single combat when both parties agreed to the terms, but few civilizations still honored such traditions. The hegemony was one of the exceptions, and their reasons had nothing to do with honor. Elena stood in the preparation chamber, adjusting her combat suit for the dozenth time. The armor was human-made, designed for mobility rather than protection, since anything heavy enough to stop the weapons her opponent would carry would also slow her down too much to be useful. Captain Mitchell had been very clear about that trade-off. Remember, the suit's neural interface will help with reaction time, but only marginally. Mitchell's voice came through the communication system. Trust your training, trust your instincts, and don't try to overthink the moment-to-moment combat. You've drilled the patterns enough that your body knows what to do. Elena nodded, though she wasn't sure anyone could see her. The preparation chamber was sparse, containing only the basic necessities and a small viewport that showed the arena beyond. What she saw there made her stomach clench with renewed fear. The arena itself was massive, easily 200 meters across and perfectly circular. The floor was some kind of metallic composite that would provide good footing while being nearly indestructible. Around the perimeter, viewing galleries rose in tiers, and Elena could see them filling with representatives from dozens of different species. This wasn't just a combat trial. It had become a galactic spectacle. "The turnout is remarkable," came Admiral Harrison's voice. "Representatives from over 400 systems. This challenge has captured attention across the galaxy." "No pressure," Elena muttered, checking her plasma blade one final time. The weapon felt alien in her hands despite 3 days of intensive training. She had learned to use it adequately, but she was far from any definition of mastery. "Elena," Dr. Kim's voice was gentle through the communication system. "I've been analyzing the psychological profiles of hegemony champions. They're trained to expect fear, desperation, or rage from their opponents. What they're not prepared for is calm determination. Your diplomatic background gives you an advantage there that warriors might not have." "Assuming I can maintain calm determination while something tries to kill me," Elena replied. "You've been maintaining it for 3 days while preparing for this moment," Captain Mitchell observed. "That suggests you're capable of more than you realize." A deep tone resonated through the chamber, indicating that the combat trial was about to begin. Elena felt her heart rate spike, then forced herself through the breathing exercises Mitchell had taught her. Fear was natural, but panic would be fatal. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the announcer's voice in a dozen different languages, "today we witness a challenge that has not been seen in over 2 centuries. The human delegation has invoked the ancient rights of single combat to contest the hegemony's claim to the 17 worlds of the Andorian sector. Elena moved to the chamber's exit portal, knowing that in moments it would open and she would step into the arena. Everything that had led to this moment, all the diplomatic maneuvering and political calculations and moral arguments, would be reduced to a simple test of will and skill. Representing the Galactic Council and the human species, the announcer continued, Ambassador Elena Vasquez of Earth. The portal opened with a soft hiss, and Elena stepped into the arena. The noise from the galleries was overwhelming, a mixture of cheers, analysis, and what she suspected were betting odds being calculated in real time. The arena floor felt solid beneath her feet, and the artificial gravity was set to galactic standard, which was marginally lighter than Earth normal. Across the arena, another portal was opening. Elena felt her breath catch as she got her first direct look at her opponent. The hegemony champion was everything the briefings had described, and more. Standing nearly 9 feet tall, the creature was a masterwork of genetic enhancement and cybernetic integration. Its basic form was humanoid, but the proportions were wrong in ways that spoke of deliberate modification. The arms were too long, the chest too broad, the legs too thick with muscle. Armor plating had been surgically integrated into its skin, creating natural protection that would have required massive external suits for most species. But it was the eyes that truly conveyed the nature of what Elena was facing. Cold, calculating, and utterly without mercy, they tracked her movement with predatory precision. This wasn't a warrior in the traditional sense. This was a living weapon designed for exactly this purpose. Representing the hegemony, the announcer's voice boomed. Champion Vorthke, the undefeated, victor of 47 combat trials, breaker of 17 worlds. The champion raised one massive arm, acknowledging the crowd's reaction. Elena noticed that it carried 2 weapons, a plasma blade similar to her own, but nearly twice the size, and what appeared to be some kind of energy projector mounted on its left arm. The briefings had mentioned that hegemony champions were allowed multiple weapons while their opponents were restricted to single blades. Another advantage in a contest already weighted heavily against her. The terms of combat, the announcer continued, are as follows: single battle to death or surrender, with the fate of the disputed systems hanging on the outcome. Combat begins when the signal is given. Elena drew her plasma blade, its blue-white energy humming to life. The weapon felt impossibly small compared to her opponent's armaments, but she had learned enough to know that plasma blades could cut through almost any material if properly applied. The question was whether she would have the skill and opportunity to apply it. Champion Vorthke began moving toward the center of the arena, its gait predatory and confident. Elena matched its movement, remembering Mitchell's advice about controlling the engagement distance. Too close, and she would be overwhelmed by superior strength and reach. Too far, and she would be vulnerable to the energy projector. Citizens of the galaxy, came a new voice, speaking in the harsh tones of the hegemony's primary language before being translated. Witness the folly of those who challenge the natural order. This human speaks of courage, but courage is meaningless against superior evolution. Today, we demonstrate why the weak must serve the strong. Elena felt a sudden pressure in her mind, a crushing weight that seemed to press down on her thoughts and emotions. The fear inducers that Dr. Kim had warned her about were activating, designed to break her will before the physical combat even began. She could feel doubt creeping in, whispers that she was outmatched, that she should surrender now and spare herself the pain of inevitable defeat. For a moment, the pressure was overwhelming. Elena felt her grip on the plasma blade falter as terror washed through her mind. This was what the hegemony's weapons did to entire populations, the psychological assault that made physical conquest almost unnecessary. But then, unexpected, came a memory from her childhood. Elena, at 8 years old, standing in her school's debate competition, facing an opponent who was older, more experienced, and backed by a prestigious academy. Everyone expected her to lose quickly and quietly. Instead, she had stood up straighter, looked her opponent in the eye, and proceeded to demolish their arguments with careful logic and unshakable determination. "The weak must serve the strong," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the arena's acoustics. "That's what you believe, isn't it? That might makes right, that superior force justifies any action?" She began moving in a slow circle, keeping the distance between herself and the champion constant. "But if that's true, then why do you need 17 worlds full of slaves? If you're truly superior, why not create your own prosperity instead of stealing it from others?" The champion's advance paused slightly, its predatory eyes narrowing. This wasn't the reaction it had been expecting. Fear, yes. Rage, perhaps. But philosophical challenge while under psychological assault was outside its programming. "And if genetic enhancement makes you inherently superior," Elena continued, feeling the fear inducer's pressure beginning to weaken as her diplomatic training kicked in, "then why do you need weapons designed to break your opponents well before the fight begins? Shouldn't your natural superiority be enough?" She could hear murmurs from the galleries above, representatives from various species discussing her unexpected approach. Instead of responding to the psychological warfare with emotion, she was treating it like a diplomatic debate. "You speak much for one about to die." Vorthe spoke for the first time, its voice a deep rumble enhanced by vocal modifications. "Words will not save you when the true combat begins. Words are what separate us from animals," Elena replied, still maintaining her careful distance. "The ability to question, to challenge, to choose our actions based on something more than mere instinct. That's what you're really trying to destroy with your fear inducers. Not just courage, but the very capacity for rational thought." The combat signal sounded then, a deep tone that resonated through the arena structure. Elena felt time slow as adrenaline flooded her system. Her 3 days of intensive training combining with years of diplomatic experience to create something new and unexpected. Vorthe K charged immediately, exactly as Dr. Kim's analysis had predicted. The creature moved with frightening speed despite its size. Plasma blade raised for a devastating downward strike that would have bisected most opponents. But Elena was no longer where the attack expected her to be. Mitchell's mobility training had emphasized the importance of angles and timing over raw speed. Elena didn't try to match the champion's velocity. Instead, she moved perpendicular to its charge, forcing it to adjust course while she maintained optimal distance. The massive plasma blade passed through the space she had occupied a split second earlier, its energy hissing through the arena's atmosphere. "First rule of diplomacy," Elena called out as she continued moving, "never make assumptions about your opponent's capabilities." The champion's energy projector fired, sending a bolt of coherent force toward Elena's position. She dove forward and rolled, feeling the blast pass overhead close enough to singe her hair. The arena floor was marked where the energy struck, showing the devastating power of the weapons arrayed against her. But the attack had followed a predictable pattern, exactly matching the footage from previous combat trials. Elena was beginning to understand what Dr. Kim had meant about efficiency becoming predictability. The champion was following a script written by dozens of previous victories, expecting its opponents to react with the same fear and desperation that had made those victories possible. Elena was not reacting with fear or desperation. She was reacting with the calculated precision of someone who had spent her career analyzing opponents and finding weaknesses in their arguments. The principle was the same, even if the stakes were different. "You know what I find interesting about genetic enhancement?" Elena said as she dodged another blade strike, this one closer than she would have liked. "It tends to optimize for specific conditions. But conditions change, don't they? And optimization for the last war isn't always helpful in the next one." Vorthe K's pattern was becoming clear now. Aggressive opening, power attacks to establish dominance, then systematic breakdown of opponent defenses. It was efficient, it was proven, and it was exactly what Elena was prepared for. The question was whether her preparation would be enough to exploit the opening she could see coming. In 30 seconds, the champion would attempt its signature finishing move, a combined blade and energy strike designed to overwhelm any defense. Elena had exactly one chance to turn the creature's strength against it. Everything depended on whether a diplomat with 3 days of combat training could execute a plan that required split-second timing and absolute commitment. In the galleries above, thousands of beings watched to see if human courage was real or merely an attractive fiction. Elena gripped her plasma blade tighter and prepared to find out. The arena had grown silent except for the hum of plasma blades and the soft impact of Elena's feet against the metallic floor. 5 minutes had passed since the combat began, and the expected quick victory had not materialized. In the galleries above, representatives from across the galaxy leaned forward in their seats, watching something unprecedented unfold. Elena's breathing was becoming labored, but she maintained her careful movement patterns. Sweat stung her eyes despite the combat suit's climate control, and her arms ached from deflecting strikes that carried enough force to shatter stone. But she was still alive, still fighting, still denying Vorthike the quick domination that had characterized all its previous victories. "You cannot run forever, human," the champion growled, its own breathing slightly elevated. "Your endurance will fail, your reflexes will slow, and then you'll die as all the others have died." "Probably," Elena acknowledged, dodging another massive blade strike. "But that's not really the point, is it?" She could see the champion's confusion growing. This was outside its experience, outside its training. Opponents were supposed to be broken by the psychological assault, overwhelmed by the physical demonstration of superior force, or demoralized by the futility of their situation. Elena was none of these things. Instead, she was analyzing. Even while fighting for her life, the diplomatic part of her mind continued to study her opponent, looking for inconsistencies, weaknesses, moments of opportunity. And slowly, pattern by pattern, she was beginning to understand something important about the nature of the hegemony's power. "Tell me something, Vorthike," Elena said as she used the champion's own momentum to avoid a particularly devastating combination attack. "How many of your previous opponents try to talk to you during combat?" The question was so unexpected that the champion actually paused for a split second. "None." They screamed, they pleaded, they raged. But they did not talk. And why do you think that was? Elena could see the confusion deepening. Combat was supposed to be about physical superiority, about the application of force until one opponent could no longer resist. Philosophical discussion wasn't part of the champion's conceptual framework for this type of encounter. "Because they were weak," Vorthike replied, but there was less certainty in its voice than before. "Or because they were terrified," Elena suggested, executing a perfect evasion that left the champion slightly off balance. "Because your psychological weapons had done exactly what they were designed to do. Broken down rational thought, reduced complex beings to basic fear responses." She could feel the fear inducers still pressing against her mind, but her diplomatic training was holding them at bay. Years of maintaining composure during hostile negotiations had given her mental discipline that pure warriors might lack. The pressure was still there, but she could think through it. "But here's what I find fascinating," Elena continued, her blade work becoming more confident as she found her rhythm. "The psychological weapons aren't just targeting me. They're affecting you too, aren't they?" Vorthike's attack patterns shifted slightly, becoming less precise. "What do you mean?" "I mean that a weapon designed to create fear and desperation doesn't distinguish between targets and users. You've been enhanced for physical combat, but you're still susceptible to psychological influences. Every time you activate those fear inducers, you're also exposing yourself to their effects." Elena saw the exact moment when her words hit home. The champion's movements became marginally less coordinated, its tactical thinking slightly impaired. The very weapons that had given it overwhelming advantages in previous battles were now working against it, creating a feedback loop of aggression and reduced rational thought. That's why you follow such predictable patterns, Elena realized, her voice gaining strength as the pieces fell into place. It's not just training. It's because the psychological effects of your own weapons make complex tactical thinking difficult. You default to simple, proven approaches because anything more sophisticated becomes impossible under the influence. The champion's energy projector fired wildly, missing Elena by several meters. She could see rage building in its enhanced features, the kind of unthinking fury that the fear inducers promoted in both targets and users. You want to know the difference between courage and stupidity, Vorthake? Elena asked, preparing for what she hoped would be the decisive moment of the combat. Courage is acting despite fear. Stupidity is acting without thinking. And right now, which one of us is thinking clearly? Vorthake's roar of fury shook the arena structure. The creature abandoned all pretense of tactical combat and charged directly toward Elena, both weapons raised for a devastating combined assault. It was the finishing move that Dr. Kim had predicted, the signature attack that had ended every previous combat trial. But it was also exactly what Elena had been waiting for. Instead of dodging backward or to the side, Elena did something that violated every instinct her training had tried to develop. She charged directly toward the oncoming champion, her smaller size allowing her to stay below the angle of its blade while moving too fast for the energy projector to track. For a split second, Elena and Vorthake were close enough to touch, the champion's massive form looming over her like a mountain of enhanced muscle and armor. But Elena's momentum carried her past the creature's guard, and her plasma blade found the one weakness that Dr. Kim's analysis had identified: the neural interface junction at the base of the champion's skull, where the cybernetic enhancements connected to organic nervous system. The blade sliced through the junction with surgical precision, severing the connections that allowed the champion's enhanced reflexes and cybernetic coordination to function. Elena rolled away as Vorthake stumbled, its movements suddenly clumsy and uncoordinated as its body tried to function without the technological augmentations that had defined its capabilities. The neural interface, Elena explained to the stunned galleries above, breathing heavily as she maintained safe distance from her now handicapped opponent. Every enhanced warrior has one. It's their greatest strength and their primary vulnerability. Cut the connection, and all that genetic manipulation becomes meaningless without the cybernetic coordination to make it work. Vorthake struggled to its feet, but the creature that had moved with predatory grace was now stumbling like a newborn colt. Its enhanced muscles were too strong for its organic nervous system to coordinate properly. Its reflexes were firing at random intervals, and its weapons had become dangerous liabilities in hands that could no longer control them precisely. "This is impossible," the champion gasped. "I am Vorthake, the undefeated. I have broken 17 worlds. I cannot be defeated by a mere human." Elena approached slowly, her blade held in a non-threatening position. "You weren't defeated by a human, Vorthake. You were defeated by the same assumptions that allowed the hegemony to enslave 17 worlds without real resistance." She could see understanding beginning to dawn in the champion's enhanced eyes. Everyone assumed that superior force was the only factor that mattered, Elena continued. The captured populations assumed that resistance was futile against such overwhelming power. The Galactic Council assumed that diplomatic solutions were impossible against an enemy with such advanced weapons. You assumed that enhanced genetics and cybernetic augmentation made you invulnerable to opponents with inferior physical capabilities. Elena gestured toward the galleries, where thousands of representatives sat in stunned silence. But assumptions are dangerous things. They make us stop thinking, stop looking for alternatives, stop questioning whether the obvious answer is actually the right answer. The hegemony's entire power structure is built on the assumption that might makes right, that superior force justifies any action. Vorthe K tried to raise its weapons, but lacked the coordination to use them effectively. The creature that had inspired terror across multiple star systems was now struggling to remain upright. "So here's a question for everyone watching," Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the arena's acoustics. "If one diplomat with 3 days of training could defeat the hegemony's greatest champion using nothing but careful observation and willingness to question assumptions, what does that tell us about the nature of their power?" The silence in the arena was absolute. Elena could feel the weight of galactic politics shifting around her words, could sense the calculations happening in minds far more advanced than her own. Representatives who had spent decades accepting the inevitability of hegemony expansion were suddenly confronting the possibility that the enemy's strength was not as absolute as it appeared. "It tells us," came a voice from the Galactic Council's viewing section, "that we have been operating under false premises." Elena looked up to see War Chief Vextar rising from his seat, his forearms gesturing toward the arena floor. "The human speaks truth," Vextar continued, his voice carrying across the arena. "We have allowed fear of the hegemony's reputation to blind us to the reality of their limitations. We have accepted their power as absolute when it is merely well presented." Other voices began joining the discussion, representatives from species that had remained silent during previous debates about hegemony expansion. Elena realized that her combat with Vorthe K had become something larger than a fight for 17 worlds. It had become a demonstration that the galaxy's greatest threat was not invincible. "Do you yield?" Elena asked Vorthe K quietly, approaching the fallen champion with her blade lowered. The creature looked up at her with something that might have been respect flickering in its enhanced eyes. "I yield. The combat is yours, Elena Vasquez of Earth." Elena deactivated her plasma blade and stepped back. Around the arena, the sound of thousands of beings rising to their feet created a rumble like distant thunder. She had won, but more importantly, she had changed the fundamental equation of galactic politics. The 17 worlds of the Andorian sector would be free, but that was only the beginning. Every species that had accepted hegemony dominance as inevitable would now have to reconsider their assumptions. Every population that had surrendered without fighting would wonder if resistance might have been possible after all. Elena looked up at the galleries, at the representatives of 1,000 worlds, and realized that she had just started something that would reshape the balance of power across the galaxy. The question now was whether the universe was ready for what came next. 3 months after the combat trial at Kepler 442, Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in the redesigned chambers of the Galactic Council, watching as the political landscape she had helped reshape continued to evolve. The formal session was about to begin, but the informal conversations happening throughout the chamber were far more interesting than any scheduled agenda. "The hegemony's retreat from the Sigma Draconis sector is confirmed," reported Commander Yixtal from the Crystalline Confederation, her harmonic tones carrying easily across the chamber. 4 more star systems have declared independence in the past week alone." Elena nodded, but kept her expression neutral. The cascade effect that had begun with her victory over Vorthe K had exceeded even her most optimistic projections. Populations that had submitted to hegemony rule were rising in rebellion, and, more importantly, they were winning. "Ambassador Vasquez," came a familiar rumbling voice from behind her. Elena turned to see War Chief Vextar approaching, his 4 arms carrying what appeared to be ceremonial documents. "I have news that will interest you." "Good news, I hope?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew what he was going to tell her. "The best kind. The Carathian battle fleet has completed joint training exercises with human forces. Your Captain Mitchell is a remarkable tactician, and her methods for analyzing enemy weaknesses have proven educational." Elena smiled at the careful diplomatic language. In reality, Captain Mitchell had spent the last 3 months teaching representatives from dozens of species how to identify and exploit the cybernetic vulnerabilities that characterized most hegemony forces. The technical superiority that had made the hegemony seem invincible was turning into a critical weakness as more civilizations learned to target the neural interface junctions. There's something else, Vextar continued, his reptilian features showing what might have been embarrassment. I owe you an apology, Ambassador. When I claimed that humans lack courage, I was operating under the same flawed assumptions that allowed the hegemony to expand unchecked for so long. No apology necessary, War Chief, Elena replied. You were working with incomplete information. We all were. Perhaps. But incomplete information does not excuse the prejudice that prevented me from seeing what your species truly represented. He paused, looking out at the gathering representatives. Courage, as you demonstrated, is not the absence of fear or the presence of superior firepower. It is the willingness to act on principle despite understanding the risks involved. Elena followed his gaze across the chamber, noting the changes that had occurred since that day in the arena. The seating arrangements had been modified to give smaller species more prominent positions. The agenda now included regular reports from former hegemony territories. Most significantly, the entire tone of council discussions had shifted from reactive caution to proactive planning. Ambassador, came another voice, this one from Dr. Sarah Kim, who had been promoted to Director of Xenothree Analysis following her role in preparing Elena for the combat trial. The analysis of Vorthe K's post-combat interviews is complete. I think you'll find the results illuminating. Elena accepted the datapad, scrolling through the psychological profile that had emerged from weeks of careful questioning. What she read was both tragic and hopeful. He's recovering well, Dr. Kim explained. The severance of his neural interface was traumatic, but it also freed him from the psychological conditioning that had shaped his entire worldview. He's been asking questions about the nature of the hegemony's power structure, about the ethical implications of conquest, about whether strength should be used to protect or dominate. Questions that enhanced warriors aren't supposed to ask, Elena observed. Exactly. The cybernetic interfaces don't just coordinate physical capabilities. They also suppress certain types of critical thinking, particularly anything that might lead to questioning orders or challenging the fundamental assumptions of hegemony ideology. Elena felt a chill as she considered the implications. How many others like him are there? Enhanced warriors who might be capable of independent thought if freed from their cybernetic controls. Potentially thousands, Dr. Kim replied. The hegemony's entire military structure depends on enhanced soldiers who don't question their missions. But if we can find ways to disrupt those control systems. She didn't need to finish the thought. Elena could see the strategic possibilities opening up, but she could also see the ethical complexities that would accompany any such effort. We'll need to be careful, Elena said quietly. Liberation that's imposed from outside isn't really liberation. Any enhanced warriors who choose to break free from hegemony control have to make that choice themselves. Agreed, but we can provide them with the knowledge and opportunity to make informed decisions. The formal session was called to order then, and Elena took her place in the expanded human delegation section. Earth's representation on the council had grown significantly following the combat trial, with additional seats allocated for military advisors, xenotechnology specialists, and cultural liaisons. The change reflected humanity's new status as a major player in galactic politics. The first item on today's agenda, announced the Council's presiding officer, is the formal establishment of the Free Worlds Alliance. Elena felt a surge of pride as she watched the proceedings. The alliance had been her idea, proposed during the political chaos that followed Vorthe K's defeat. Rather than simply driving the hegemony back, she had suggested creating a formal structure to support worlds seeking independence and to coordinate resistance efforts. 17 founding members have ratified the Alliance Charter, the presiding officer continued, with an additional 43 worlds expressing formal interest in membership. The Alliance's stated goals are mutual defense, technological cooperation, and the establishment of ethical standards for interstellar governance. The chamber erupted in discussion as representatives debated the implications. Elena noticed that most of the negative reactions came from species that had traditionally maintained neutral positions regarding hegemony expansion. The prospect of organized resistance apparently made them uncomfortable. Ambassador Vasquez, the presiding officer, called. As the primary architect of the alliance proposal, would you care to address the council's concerns? Elena rose, feeling the familiar weight of galactic attention settling on her shoulders. 3 months ago, that attention had been skeptical and dismissive. Now, it was respectful, even if not always friendly. Honored representatives, she began, the Free World Alliance is not a military organization, though it will coordinate defensive capabilities. It is not a government, though it will establish standards for ethical governance. It is simply a formalization of the principle that every sentient species has the right to determine its own destiny without external coercion. She gestured toward the data displays showing the current political situation. The hegemony's power was based on the assumption that resistance was futile, that their technological and military superiority made opposition impossible. We have demonstrated that assumption to be false. But demonstration alone is not enough. Elena's voice grew stronger as she continued. The 17 worlds we fought to liberate are free today, but they remain vulnerable to reconquest if they stand alone. The 43 worlds considering alliance membership are taking the first steps toward independence, but they need support and coordination to succeed. The alliance provides that support without imposing external control. And what happens, interrupted Representative Quintal from the Ethereal Collective, when the alliance grows powerful enough to become a threat to other civilizations? How do we know that this organization will not eventually develop the same expansionist tendencies that characterize the hegemony? It was a fair question, and one that Elena had been expecting, because the alliance's fundamental structure prevents it. Unlike the hegemony, which is organized around domination and control, the alliance is organized around voluntary cooperation. Any member world can withdraw at any time. Any proposed action requires consensus among the membership. Most importantly, the alliance's charter explicitly prohibits any form of conquest or forced integration. Words on a document, Quintal replied dismissively. The hegemony probably had similar idealistic language in its founding documents. Elena smiled, remembering her diplomatic training about the importance of concrete examples over abstract principles. Perhaps, but there's one crucial difference between the alliance and the hegemony. The alliance was founded by someone who had the power to impose her will on others and chose not to. The chamber grew quiet as representatives considered her words. After defeating Vorthike, I could have demanded almost anything from the council, Elena continued. Recognition of human supremacy, territorial concessions, preferential trade agreements. Instead, I proposed a structure that gives humanity no special privileges, no controlling authority, no ability to impose our values on other species. She paused, letting the implications sink in. The alliance works because it's built on the principle of voluntary cooperation rather than imposed dominance. That principle doesn't change based on the organization's size or influence. War Chief Vextar stood, his massive form commanding immediate attention. The Carathian Empire formally endorses the Free World Alliance and requests consideration for membership. The announcement sent shockwaves through the chamber. The Carathians have been the galaxy's dominant military power for over 2 centuries, and their decision to join rather than oppose the alliance fundamentally changed the political equation. Furthermore, Vextar continued, the Carathian battle fleet places itself at the disposal of any alliance member facing hegemony aggression. We have spent too many years allowing evil to flourish because challenging it seemed too difficult. Elena felt tears threatening to blur her vision. 3 months ago, Vextar had dismissed human courage as meaningless romanticism. Now he was voluntarily subordinating the galaxy's most powerful military to an organization founded on the principles the humans represented. The session continued for several more hours, with species after species announcing their positions regarding the alliance. By the end of the day, the political map of the galaxy had been fundamentally redrawn. That evening, Elena stood on the observation deck of the council station, looking out at the stars that no longer seemed quite so distant or hostile. Captain Mitchell joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the human delegation's quarters. "So," Mitchell said quietly, "how does it feel to have changed the galaxy?" Elena accepted the coffee gratefully, using the warmth to chase away the chill of the observation deck. "Terrifying, mostly. 3 months ago, I was just trying to save 17 worlds. Now we're dealing with a complete restructuring of galactic civilization. And I keep wondering if we're making the right choices. What if the Alliance becomes everything we're trying to prevent? What if freeing all these worlds leads to chaos and suffering rather than peace and prosperity?" Mitchell was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Do you remember what you told me during the training sessions? About courage being the willingness to act despite understanding the risks." "Yes. Well, the risk of making wrong choices is always present. But the alternative is accepting wrong choices made by others. At least this way, people get to participate in making their own mistakes." Elena smiled, recognizing the wisdom in her friend's observation. "You're saying we did the right thing? I'm saying you did the human thing. You saw people suffering and decided to act, even when the odds were impossible and the consequences were unknown. That's what humans do." Elena looked out at the stars again, thinking about the world that were now free to chart their own courses, about the species that were learning to question assumptions they had accepted for centuries, about the future that was now possible because someone had been willing to step into an arena when everyone else stayed seated. "I wonder," she said quietly, "what other assumptions we're still carrying around that need to be questioned." "Probably lots of them," Mitchell replied. "But that's a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, let's just appreciate what we've accomplished." Elena raised her coffee cup in a small salute to the universe beyond the viewport. "To courage, then. And to the galaxy we're helping to build." "To courage," Mitchell agreed. "And to the diplomat who reminded us all that sometimes the impossible is just another word for untried." As they stood together watching the stars, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. 3 days of combat training had given her the skills to survive in the arena. 3 years of diplomatic service had given her the tools to understand her opponent's weaknesses. But it was a lifetime of being human, of believing that right and wrong mattered more than easy and difficult that had made everything else possible. The galaxy was changing one world at a time, one assumption at a time, one act of courage at a time. And Elena Vasquez, diplomat of Earth, had helped to start something that would echo across the stars for generations to come. Outside the viewport, the universe waited to see what other impossibilities humans might attempt next. The words hung in the chamber like a challenge to the universe itself. Elena Vasquez, diplomat and negotiator, had just volunteered to face a genetically enhanced killing machine in single combat with the fate of 4 billion souls hanging in the balance. Around her, the representatives of 1,000 worlds fell silent as they contemplated the implications of one human's willingness to back words with action. In that moment of absolute quiet, Elena realized that she had just changed everything. The question now was whether humanity's courage would prove to be their salvation or their doom.